Let's talk about how to calculate the area and perimeter of squares, rectangles, and parallelograms, which is something that you've been learning about for years. But you'll notice as we go through this lesson that it relies pretty heavily on an old concept, which is the Pythagorean theorem. So do you remember what it is? If you said a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you are correct. But what does that mean? Well, remember it has to do with right triangles. A and B are the legs of the right triangle. Those are the two sides that create the right angle. And C is the hypotenuse. That's the longest side of the right triangle. It is the side across from the right angle. So if you square the legs and add it together, that's equal to squaring the hypotenuse. And we're going to be using the Pythagorean theorem a whole bunch during this lesson, so I wanted to take a quick second to review what it is. We're going to be discussing calculating the area and the perimeter of various shapes. In today's lesson, we're just going to talk about rectangles, squares, and parallelograms. And then in the rest of the lessons for this week, we'll also talk about the other shapes, including rhombuses, trapezoids, triangles, and circles. The perimeter of a shape is the distance around the shape. You can think about that like how much fencing would you need to enclose this area. Whereas the area of this shape is how much space there is inside. So like how much grass seed would I need to cover the area inside of the fences. Each shape has its own formula for calculating area, and they're all kind of similar because they're all kind of related back to rectangles. The area of a rectangle is equal to the base times the height. So whatever one of the sides is, multiplied by whatever the other side is, that gives you the area. The area of a square is also base times height. It just so happens that all of the sides are the same. So it's not just b and h, you could actually call it s and s. So in addition to calling it b times h, sometimes you'll also see the area of a square as s squared. And the area of a parallelogram is also base times height. So really all three of these formulas that we're going to be using for the quadrilaterals we'll be looking at today, they're all the same. However, I want to draw your attention to what the height of a parallelogram is, because it's not one of the side lengths. The height has to be perpendicular to the base. So every time I give you a parallelogram, one of the sides of the parallelogram is going to be given, and then the height is the distance that is perpendicular from that. Now you might notice I didn't discuss perimeter at all, and that's because there's not really a fancy formula for perimeter. The perimeter is just you add up all of the sides. So if you're talking about a rectangle, you just add b plus h plus b plus h. If you're talking about a square, you would say b plus h plus b plus h, or s plus s plus s plus s. You could certainly just call that 4s if you wish. And then it's not b plus h for the perimeter of a parallelogram because h is not on the outside of the shape. For perimeter, you're only adding up the outsides, so you would add up whatever this length is, not h. All right, let's take a look at some examples. Here we have a square, and I want you to tell me the area and the perimeter. Well, the area of a square is just side squared, and the side lengths of this square are 9 inches. So the area of the square would be 9 squared, or 9 times 9, which is 81 square inches. Please notice that on the label that I have here, it does say inches squared, because it's not just a linear unit, it's not just a straight line, it's an entire area. So you do have to write inches squared, or centimeters squared, or yards squared, whatever it is, if you're talking about area. Whereas perimeter is a linear length, it's just how long is all of these 4 sides added together. So perimeter is 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9, or 4 times 9 if you prefer. So the perimeter of this square is 36 inches. So that was a relatively straightforward example because we had what we needed in order to calculate the area and the perimeter. This time we're not given the side length, we're given the length of a diagonal. And the diagonal has nothing to do with the perimeter and nothing to do with the area, so what am I supposed to do? Well, what I need is the side length, so I need s. And actually all of them are called s. Do you see how there's two right triangles created by the diagonal? Like this one right here? And couldn't I use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out what s is? Because the Pythagorean theorem is just a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And the s's are the legs, because they make the right angle. And the 20 is the hypotenuse, because it's across from the right angle. So I could fill in my Pythagorean theorem like this. S squared plus s squared equals 20 squared. Well, that's 2s squared, and 20 squared is 400. Then I can divide both sides by 2, and then square root both sides. And now I know that each of the side lengths are each 14.1421356 yada yada centimeters long. And since I know the side length, I can figure out the area by squaring that. And I can figure out the perimeter by multiplying that number by 4. Now, if you just typed in the 14.1, the rounded side length, you'll actually get 56.4. I used the entire 14.1421356 yada yada. I just kept the whole thing in my calculator. So when you're doing some of these calculations, you might end up with a slightly different decimal, but it should be pretty close to what the answer is supposed to be. All right, let's try a rectangle. The area of a rectangle is base times height. The base is 9, the height is 12, so the area is 9 times 12, which is 108 square inches. The perimeter is all 4 sides added together. Now we know from what we learned last chapter that rectangles have opposite sides that are equal, so both of these sides have to be 9, and both of these sides have to be 12, so my perimeter would be 9 plus 9 plus 12 plus 12, and that gives me an answer of 42. So again, that was a pretty straightforward example because we had all the information that we needed. But what if I don't give you everything at the get-go? Could you figure it out? Yeah. Well, I need this missing side length, right? Or this one, either way. Do you see another right triangle that we could solve using the Pythagorean theorem? Like this one? So if I use a squared plus b squared equals c squared, well, which thing is c? That's always the most important thing to figure out when you're filling in your Pythagorean theorem, is which ones are the legs and which ones are the hypotenuse. For this triangle, the hypotenuse is 37 because it is the side that is across from the right angle. So that makes x and 35 a and b. And then I'll crunch those numbers, and I get that x has to be 12. So now I know that the area has to be 12 times 35, or 35 times 12, that order doesn't matter, and that's 420 square centimeters. And the perimeter has to be 12 plus 12 plus 35 plus 35. You'll notice I'm not using 37 in either of these calculations because 37 is a diagonal, and the diagonals have nothing to do with area or perimeter. That's just how we got to the side length. So 12 plus 12 plus 35 plus 35, that's 94 centimeters. All right, let's try a parallelogram. The area of a parallelogram is equal to the base times the height. Now remember, the height has to be perpendicular to the base. So in this diagram, 9 is my base, and 12 is the height, because 12 is marked as being perpendicular to the base. So the area is 9 times 12, which is 108 square inches. And then for the perimeter, I don't want 12, I want 12.4, because 12.4 is on the outside. 12 was the height is on the inside. I don't care about 12 when I'm calculating perimeter. The perimeter is just 9 plus 9 plus 12.4 plus 12.4 for a total of 42.8 inches. But I'm sure you guessed what's coming next. Let's try a harder one that I don't have everything that I need. The easiest thing to solve for first this time is actually the perimeter, because I have all of the measurements on the outside of this parallelogram. This side would have to be a total of 31 centimeters, because part of it's 18 and part of it's 13. So for my perimeter, I can just add 31 and 31, and 85 and 85, and get to a total of 232 centimeters. However, to calculate the area, I need the height, which is this dotted line inside of the shape. I can tell that that's the height, even though it's horizontal. I know it feels weird for a height to be horizontal instead of vertical, but height doesn't have anything to do with up and down or left and right. Height is just perpendicular to one of the sides. So this 31 centimeters side is the base, even though that's not what it's sitting on. And again, I know that feels weird because you think that the base should be the side that it sits on, like the base should be 85, but it's not. The base is the side that is perpendicular to the height. So I need to figure out how long is this dotted line, because that's my height. Well, we're going to have to use the Pythagorean theorem again. Basically, every time you're missing a measurement on your diagram, you're going to have to use the Pythagorean theorem. So look for a right triangle. Here it is. Identify which of those sides is C, which one is the hypotenuse, and that'd be 85 because it's across from the right angle. So set up your a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That would be h squared plus 13 squared equals 85 squared. Crunch those numbers. And it turns out that our height is 84. So now that I know my height and I know my base, I can multiply base times height and get to my total area of 2,604 square centimeters. All right, well, let's turn it around a little bit. Instead of me asking for an area or asking for a perimeter, I'm going to ask for different parts of the shape. For example, with this parallelogram, I want to know what is the height. If I know that the area is 396 and I know that the base is 18. Well, remember that the formula for the area of a parallelogram is just base times height. So let's fill in what I know. A is area, and the area is 396. B is base, and the base is 18. The only thing that I don't know in that original formula is h. So can't I just divide both sides by 18? So it turns out that the height is 22 yards. So it's really the exact same thing as what we were doing in the previous examples, just in reverse. Instead of knowing the base and the height and figuring out the area, I know the area, so I'll figure out the base or the height. On our next example, we have a rectangle, and its perimeter is 204 kilometers. And I know that one of its sides is 32. And what I need to calculate is the other side. Well, what's the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle? We don't really have one, right? You just add up all the sides, so perimeter equals base plus height plus height. Well, again, let's just fill in what we know. The perimeter is 204, so I can put 204 into P. And if I call 32 my base, well, wouldn't this side over here be 32 as well, right? We learned that about rectangles, that their opposite sides are equal. So I can fill in 32 for B and 32 for the other B. The only thing I don't know is my h's. In other words, it looks like this. I can take 204 and put it into P, because that's perimeter, and I can put 32 into both of the B's, because those are my bases. And then I just have to solve this equation to figure out the length of the missing side. So combine like terms, 32 and 32 is 64, h and h is 2h. Subtract 64, divide by 2, and it turns out that the missing side length is 70 kilometers. On our last example for today, I'm telling you that the perimeter of this square is 44 feet. And I want you to tell me what the area is. Well, what's the formula for the perimeter of a square? It's just perimeter equals side plus side plus side plus side. And I don't know what the sides are, but I do know that the perimeter is 44, so I can put 44 into P in this formula. And there's 4 s's here. Go ahead and combine those like terms, and I have 44 equals 4s. Divide both sides by 4, and it turns out that my sides each measure 11 feet. But I wasn't asked for the side length, I was asked for the area. And the area of a square is side squared. So I can plug in what I just figured out the side length was to say that area equals 11 squared. In other words, the area of this square is 121 square feet. And that's all you need to know about calculating the area and perimeter of squares, rectangles, and parallelograms. In the next part of this lesson, we're going to learn how to calculate the area and perimeter of trapezoids, rhombuses, and triangles.